Is it a sin to make a profit as a Christian business owner? Let me just say this. People know this about me. I was professionally doing music as an independent small business creator from 2015 to 2020. That is where I cut my teeth in terms of all of this sort of stuff. And so I'm actually really glad that I have this channel now on the Bless God business channel, because initially these sorts of videos would go up on my main channel, and all those are still up for your viewing pleasure. And so from 2015 to 2020, I primarily did music. And then around 2018-ish, I started to see that there was a need amongst Christian creatives, specifically Christian musicians, who many of them would pursue their desire and the vision they believe God gave them to be an artist at the expense, oftentimes, of their family, at the expense of their kids suffering, their wives suffering, because they were trying to juggle too many things. Sometimes even saying stuff like, God told me to quit my job, while neglecting and not taking care of their responsibilities. My anchor in terms of what it means to be a man, in terms of what it means to be a godly man, is here in 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So people may have issue with this passage, but it is what it is. And this is Paul writing to the church and telling them how to deal with widows who are in need versus widows who can remarry. And he kind of gets to this punchline of like, hey, you need to be able to take care of your own family, and especially the needs of your own household. Now, again, within a Christian space, a lot of talented people, a lot of musicians who were brilliant, but would struggle on how to make money off of their art. And oftentimes artists, if you guys don't know, they're very pure. They're the intersection of art and ushering in beauty with a desire to magnify Jesus is very much overlapped, right? They're purist. But sometimes your family and your responsibilities can die on the altar of pure art, or keeping it real, or putting the ministry first. And I fundamentally, if we're looking at this verse and your family's suffering, I don't think you're putting anything first. I don't think you're putting God first. So your family can suffer at the altar of ministry. Now, that was the type of content I was doing. I started with Fan Love Fridays, where I would do live streams reviewing people's music, and then it got more and more technical. And I've been very transparent about this. I was more or less doing kind of this like Christian version of Gary V, if you will, trying to give people very practical, sometimes brash advice on how to navigate being an independent artist, being an entrepreneur, so on and so forth. Now, the main channel obviously has evolved since then, and we've kind of leaned into more cultural commentary. I didn't really start talking about my faith consistently until like the end of 2020 in terms of like making Christian content. So you guys go look at that back catalog on the main channel. That's pretty much what we're dealing with. There is Christian artists, Christian creatives trying to help them navigate how to build something that's sustainable. Why? Because that's what I was able to do. I was able to take care of my family living in Southern California. My wife didn't have to work from the year 2015 to 2020 as an independent Christian musician. That is a huge feat that very few people do as an independent musician, let alone a Christian independent musician. No corporations behind me, nothing like that. And so that's what I was trying to do, provide value for people. Now, with regards to this, it raises a lot of questions. What is the relationship between business and a Christian? And is it sinful to make a profit or to monetize your audience as a Christian? It's a good question. It's a good tension there. And if you guys couldn't tell, this channel exists to help people navigate this conversation, because there's so much bad theology around this. There's so much bad ideology around this. When things like communism and socialism creep in, when things like, hey, Jesus demanded that the only way you could truly follow him is if you sold everything. Even though the scriptures in Acts 5, when you see Ananias and Sapphira, Peter tells them, hey, this was yours. The things that you sold, you could have kept some for yourself, but it was the fact that Ananias and Sapphira lied that they ended up being struck dead by God. So we're going to get into the relationship between the customer, the business, how to navigate this. And I'm excited because this gives me this channel, and haven't been consistent on here, but it's exciting to have an outlet to talk about these things, because I think so many people honestly just need to be equipped to think about these things differently, because I believe there are people who have ideas that can serve people, yet they're afraid because of all the cognitive dissonance. I know I have this thing that's going to bless people, add value to people, but Am I in sin if I charge for it? Am I in sin if I make a profit so I could provide for my family? Am I in sin if I build a team whose other families that I could help provide for through offering a service or a product? And so business is very simple. You have a service or a product and someone else has a need. The best products and the best services always solve a real tangible need. If it doesn't, then your product would fail. This is fundamentally 101 of any type of business.
Okay, so from my understanding, businesses operate on a margin. Now, for the people listening, what is a margin?
Well, the margin is the difference in revenue between what it cost you to create something and what you sell it at. And so different businesses run at different margins. For example, food businesses run on very narrow margins.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of overhead, a lot of actual goods, food, transporting, grocery stores, so on and so forth.
2%,
yeah,
3% margins.
2 or 3% margins. Then there's like clothing businesses, and they might run a higher margin. They'll buy things and usually mark it up 50%. So if you're buying that $30 t-shirt, it usually is bought at $15 from the maker, and then they usually, it could cost them as little as $3 to $7.50 to make it, depending on the quality. And so different businesses run on different margins, depending on how many pieces are involved and how much they scale. A massive, massive business that's scaling big can run on a small margin because that small margin scaled up can be a good amount of revenue.
So what does that margin go to? What's the difference between the cost and the margin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a margin is going to go to creating the actual product and what it takes to actually make something. Most people probably know this. Most businesses fail within the first several years because it's hard to get something off the ground. There's also sales tax to said business that is sometimes paid on the customer side, but no matter, or maybe it's not charged on the customer side, but the business owner is always eating that one way or another, meaning even if they're not charging it, they still have to pay for it. There is the time of the people who are perhaps fulfilling said product. There is the marketing assets in terms of getting the word out about said product. There's paying all those people. And so there's a lot of layers that goes into building anything.
Yep. And so then after that, you got the profit, right?
Yep.
That's the goal, is that you sell something and the net profit, which would be not just the cost of goods, but then also the cost of labor and fulfillment and all that stuff, is the profit. Now, my question is it a sin to take excess from what it costs to operate, right? Because I think
in terms of all of the things we just added on.
So yeah, imagine you add on all those things and then there's additional money left over.
Well, it would be a sin if you're a Marxist. So the entire premise of Marxism is that the workers are to own the means of production.
Gotcha.
Whereas in a capitalistic system, we believe that the capital can be owned by a person, not the workers. And usually the workers turns into the government. So when I grew up in Soviet Union, Azerbaijan and Soviet Union, Russia, the workers own the means of capital, the thing that they used to create said product, but it just became the state, and the state owned the means of production. And so there was state ran everything. And so in a communistic system, yes, you would, then the workers would own that, and then there would be no profit margin. In a capitalistic system where you can buy a computer, you can design a graphic, you can sell that graphic, or you could take a picture, you could sell that picture. You own the computer. That is the means of production that could be privately owned as private property to own said means of production, or the IP, the intellectual property, the idea that you're selling. And so it would depend on which framework you're coming from. If you're coming from a communist, Marxist standpoint, in that worldview, yeah, it is a sin to take the excess profit and not disperse it equally amongst your workers. In a capitalistic system, people can own the means of production, and they can take that profit and reinvest it back into the business, which is how you scale and grow, or they can pay their employees more if they choose to do so, or they can go buy themselves a yacht if they feel like it.
So what is the Christian to, is there some verses you have to do? They're a graphic designer, and it costs them $0 to actually produce the good. But let's say they set themselves an hourly rate of $50 an hour, and then they want to have a profit on top of that. So they charge $100 an hour, meaning cost them $50. That's what they'd be paid at an agency, and then the $50 they're going to throw in their business account, and then maybe
for taxes, and all that other stuff,
and then maybe withdraw from that later as additional profits. Are they stiffing the church that they're designing the graphic for at $100 an hour? Or are they stiffing the other Christian business owner that is charging paying them $100 an hour to create the thing? That extra $50. What's the theological scriptural framework behind that?
Well, the great news about it is no one has to work with that person. no one has to use that person's service or product. If someone comes in better at a lower rate, this is the beauty of competition and capitalism, right? Is that, hey, you might be charging $100 an hour. Someone might be charging $25 an hour. Someone living overseas might be charging $15 an hour. This is like services like Fiverr. So then you get into the ethical dilemma of, do you want to work with people overseas, and what are the wages and the cost of living? There's so many variables that go into it. But if you want to work with someone and those are their rates, then those are their rates. You don't have to haggle. You could just say, hey, this is out of my budget. I don't want this thing.
Okay, so what would you say to the graphic designer that is like, hey, I'm a Christian. People are paying me this $100 an hour. I feel hurt. I feel conflicted that I'm taking a profit because I know that the Bible has some socialist crossovers, such as the year of Jubilee and giving people back to the original owners and selling all your possessions and following Jesus. I don't even need a house. I can just lay on the ground and kind of serve the Lord. As is. There's no net worth requirement to follow Jesus. So what's the framework for them?
Yes and amen. If they want to do that and they want to go be a nomad and they want to build a compound and live in a trailer park, all that is fine. There's nothing. The issue becomes is when you look at the scriptures, anyone who does not provide for their relatives. This isn't your house. This is your extended family. For their relatives, and especially for those in their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than a non-believer. So what I tell because it's usually young men who are thinking like this. Hey, like I had a guy tell me like, man, I'm just cool to just live on a trailer park with me and my wife. And I'm like, you may be okay with thinking that at 21. Let me tell you, when you're 31 and you have children, little children, and you want them to be able to run around, you may not feel the same way.
Come on.
If you want to have your wife stay home to help raise your children, you may not feel the same way. And there's nothing wrong with living in a cheaper part of the country or a cheaper house. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I lived in a 2-bedroom, 2.5 condo up until 2 years ago. That was 850 square feet, right?
How much did you pay to own the place?
That place? Oh, I didn't pay anything. I rented it.
You rented it for how long?
For 15 years.
That's and you didn't move around?
I didn't move around. No, I stayed in the same place, 850 square feet. And
but you did that so you could buy a really nice car?
No, I drove a 2006 Prius up until 2 years ago, up until a year and a half ago.
This whole
I actually went without a car for a while.
This entrepreneurship thing sounds like it sucks.
It sucks, some of it, right? Because you're making short-term sacrifices for long-term investments.
Come on.
And I think people have a disconnect, and they think that everyone who's a business owner is this greedy, gluttonous, fat cat that kicks their feet up, and that's just not the reality. Most people fail in business. And then people who actually build businesses struggle for a very long time. And even after they make it, whatever that means, there's still the tension of payroll, taxes, products missing, supply chain issues. There's so many layers to this sort of stuff. So there is pros and cons of being self-employed, not being self-employed with a small team, trying to scale that small team, trying to scale your product suite. All these things come with a sacrifice. And so I think that the fundamental question is it sinful to make a profit? I don't think so. I think when we see Jesus speaking about this in the passage, this is kind of the Luke version of the parable of the talents. I love the parable of the talents, right? In Luke chapter 19, verse 12, this is Jesus speaking, and he's using the parable, and he says, a nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. Calling 10 of his servants or employees, right? He gave them 10 minas, or 10 bags of gold, and said to them, engage in business until I come. In the KJV version, it's called Occupy Till I Come. This is what our 60-day devotional is all about. Occupying until I come. Jesus is the king. He's gone. He's going to come back. But until then, the language here used in the ESV, shout out to all the Calvinists, is engage in business, right? And how? He says, engage in business till I come. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. When he returned, having received the kingdom, he ordered these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know what they had gained by doing business. What they had gained by doing business. Profit. I'm giving you this. This is not your own. And what you do with that is the said profit. They first came saying, Lord, your minas has made 10 more. So he doubled. The first came before him saying, Lord, your mina has made 10 minas more. And he says to them, well done, good servant, because you have been faithful in very little, you shall have authority over 10 cities. In the Matthew 25 version, one gets 5. He brings back 5 more, right?
Okay.
And the second came saying, Lord, your mina has made 5 minas. And he said to him, and you are to be over 5 cities. Then another came, saying, Lord, here is your mina, which I kept lay under a handkerchief, for I was afraid, because you are a severe man. You take what you did not deposit, and you reap what you did not sow. You take what you did not deposit, you reap what you do not sow. That is the idea of being an entrepreneur. Not everything you're doing is by your own hands all the time. Some of these things you're not sowing, but you're still seeing a harvest. Right?
Yeah.
This is how Jesus is being described.
Hello.
Now, clearly there's a macro spiritual overtone in this,
Yes.
but this is not a business is bad, profit is bad passage of scripture.
Jesus wouldn't use a sinful concept to explain a holy metaphor.
Absolutely. He would not use that's a great way to put it. He said to him, I will condemn you with your own words, you wicked servant. You know that I was a severe man, taking what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why did you not put my money into the bank, and at my coming have collected it with interest? Hey, you didn't go and double up, and you didn't invest these things. At least you could have just put it in the bank. And he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. And they said to him, Lord, he has 10 minas. I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given, but from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. But as far as these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me. Very intense passage, very intense Jesus in this passage. But this idea that making a profit or having something that you're investing in is bad. The concept isn't what's the margin and what's this and what's the real issue is stewardship. Your time, your talent, your treasure, your ability to build something or not, it's not your own, it's God's.
Yeah.
And so if you have the potential to build something and you water it down, you waste it, you squander it, you're too distracted, you do it frivolously and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be accountable for that, right? I'm not saying this is a heaven or hell issue. I'm just saying the idea of stewardship, managing someone else's resources.
Yeah.
As Christians, we look at our time, talent, and treasure as managing God's ultimate resources. And so if you are just burying it, or you're afraid, or you have a cognitive dissonance because you have some false ideology and some false theology around Jesus, speaking of business in a very powerful and positive light, that's going to get in the way of you ultimately, I think, making the most of your time, talent, and treasure. And that's a bummer. That is happening all the time. That's what I was dealing with when I was initially on YouTube in 2018 to, I'd say, 2020, 2021, slowly shifting into more Christian content, as I'm dealing with people that are afraid, they're scared. And I'm being transparent. Hey, like, I live in Southern California. It is very expensive to live here. Hey, we choose to homeschool our kids. My wife does not work a job. Hey, we need a car. We need a home, right? And these things are
Why
not
don't you just
bad.
move to a cheaper part of the country?
Some people do. A lot of people have moved to a cheaper part of the country. That's very easy to say when you aren't connected to a place, you don't have a church in the place, you don't have family in a place, you don't have roots in a place.
Oh, so this isn't vacation. This is your home.
This is where I live. Some people are born and raised in Hawaii. Some people are born and raised in Texas. Some people are born and raised in Alabama. I'm here in San Diego. This is my home. I actually, as a refugee, got kicked out of my home. Thanks to Soviet communism and all that nastiness. And so the parallel of the scripture in the spiritual meaning of, hey, Jesus is coming back. Make the most of what I've been given. And the practical, like the surface reading level of it, the principle is still the same. Make the most of your time, talent, and treasure. That means that if you're going to build something, build it in a way where there is margin involved, so you don't run yourself, your family, your marriage, your health, your mental health into the ground, chasing your own tail. And unfortunately, that's what I was experiencing when I was doing a lot of the content within the Christian artist space. A lot of marriages shipwrecked, a lot of people burnt out, a lot of families completely destroyed because people didn't know how to build things out in a way that was sustainable for them.
All right, cool. I think you explained pretty well that it's not immoral and not a sin to collect a profit. Or my next question is, how much profit is too much profit? When does profit turn to greed?
We'll have to get into that on the next video. Click right here.